Okay, and here we are back in test taking skills. The first two videos, if you happen to be catching us in the middle, I've tried to label them. The first one talks about kind of all the stuff before you go to take a test. So planning for the test, knowing everything you can about it. The second one really delves into the anxiety issues that go into test taking and kind of some suggestions on how to deal with those issues. So this one, we are going to talk about the mechanics of test taking. Okay, so during the test, this is a big one. Second guessing is something that I see all the time from students. And essentially, this is what second guessing is. So, I don't know the answer to a question. The material is familiar, of course, because I studied it, but I don't know the correct answer to this particular question. So, I'm guessing when I pick my answer. So here's the thing, when you're guessing, if you take that gut response, that first kind of, I think it's this, without overthinking it, so that first feeling you get, it's right 80% of the time, according to statistics. So statistically, that gut response, that first response is right 80% of the time. Of course, that means it's also wrong 20% of the time. Now, and you may vary from statistics. That is just statistics, and statistics takes an average or a mean of the population group. So, there were the outliers that were on the 50-50s and, the 90-10s or whatever. So, it's just a statistical average. However, when you are second guessing, so here's the thing, you guess the first time. And then when you're second guessing, you're going back and looking at those same things that you guessed on. And you're essentially gambling that you're hitting the approximately 20% that you got wrong rather than the 80% that you got right. And the 80% is a much larger pool. So, you're probably statistically going to hit the 80% that you got right rather than the 20% that you got wrong. Now, does that mean you'll never change a wrong answer to a right answer? Well, of course you will, because, you may hit one of that 20%. Okay. Now, that's totally different than if you're going through a test and you find some information that jogs your memory and you're like, oh yeah, now I remember that. Oh my gosh, I totally answered this question wrong. And then you go back. Well, that's different. That's using new information and critical thinking skills to go back and change an answer. That's not second guessing. So there's a difference. The second one is good. So using the that new information, critical thinking, going back and change an answer, that's good. Second guessing can be, it's essentially kind of gambling almost. So be very judicious with second guessing. I would be very careful with that. In fact, serial second guessers, I often just tell them, do your first guess and go on. And I hear back from students a lot of times that actually does help their overall average. Of course, they don't do amazing all the time, but at least they typically pass. Okay, here's another one that I see a lot of. So too fast or reading the answer into the question. So students are anxious during tests, obviously, so they tend to go a little too fast and they don't read the entire question. They miss important information, and when you do that, it's very easy to choose the wrong answer. And I hear all the time from students that were like, I knew the answer to that question. I wasn't paying attention. I read too fast. I missed this word, whatever. The other one, the reading answer into the question. So a lot of times the answers are shorter than the question. The question can be like, 2-3 lines of text. And so it can be really difficult sometimes to really focus on the question rather than the answers, especially if they're only like 1 word or 2 words or something like that. And when you look at it, you see everything. You see the questions and the answers, and your brain is very smart. So it's already taken in the answers probably before you've had an opportunity to really read the question, especially on the short answers. And so what I find a lot of times is a student read partway through a question, and they're like, oh yeah, it's this one. But if they'd have read the rest of the question, they would have seen some sort of qualifier that made that answer not correct. So just be very careful when you are going through your test. Make sure you read the entire question. If you having a problem and you just can't seem to do that, you might consider covering up the answers, and that forces you to read the entire question in order to formulate an answer, and then you can see if your answer matches the multiple choice answers, or one of them. All right, when you're looking at a question, it's really important to figure out what is really being asked. So sometimes, and we're going to go through some practice questions in the next video, sometimes multiple choice questions can be really lengthy. What probably could have been asked in like 5 or 6 words is asked in 2 to 3 lines of text, and it just seems like a really long question. And it can be time intensive in reading, and it's hard sometimes to focus on what is really being asked because there's so much information there. So it's really good sometimes to jot on your scratch paper, or even, if you can, underline important information on the actual test. So if it's a test that they're just going to shred or you're allowed to write on, by all means, underline the important information. And along those lines, cross out the extraneous words and phrases. Now, if it isn't something like that, use your scratch paper and write down what it is that is the important information, what's being asked on your scratch paper. Now, clearly, you wouldn't want to do this for every question because that is going to take way too much time. But you can do it for the ones that you're really struggling with and trying to figure out. All right, pay attention to qualifier words. So those most, usually, first, those are super important in determining. So you might have multiple answers that are correct on an exam, but if they're looking for the most, then you're going to have to critically determine which one of those is the most. So make sure that you pay attention to those. Or for steps, like they all might be steps, but they're just looking for the first step. So qualifier words can be super important. If you are struggling on a question, those are good ones to write down. Eliminate the wrong answers. There are more of those. So in a multiple choice exam, where there is only one right answer, and they're not all like that. Some of them have multiple right answers and those kinds of things. But if it is just one right answer, go ahead and eliminate the wrong answers. Hopefully you can get yourself down to at least a 50-50 choice, if not the correct answer, because you were able to eliminate them all. And then here we come into remembering that negatives reverse the meaning of statements. So if you're looking for the least positive, right, don't pay attention to the positive, pay attention to the least part, right? Because the least positive is the most negative, right? So make sure you're paying attention to those reverses, those negatives, and how they reverse the meaning of a statement. All right, I'm going to include in the notes on this a YouTube video that I really like that talked about the statistics and some of the some more tips and things on how to go about doing multiple choice exams. So look for that in the notes. Next one, we're going to go over some practice.